So hi everyone and welcome to the third session of our Graduate Application Support Month. This month we've delivered information sessions every week on the different aspects of the graduate application process. So in case you've missed any sessions that you were interested in, the recordings of the same are available on our official YouTube channel. We're very excited to kickstart to have this third session of the Graduate Application Support Month. With an interactive session on applying for Masters in Economics with two very impressive candidates. And so before I dive into their introductions, a little bit about Women in Econ Policy, especially for those joining us for the first time. Women in Econ Policy is a nonprofit that aims to create an inclusive space for women interested in economics and policy to learn from each other, network, and collaborate. The group consists of more than 1,700 women of various experiences, ages, and backgrounds with a common interest in economics, development, and policy issues. Please visit our website, www.womenineconpolicy.com, or any of the social media pages for more information and to stay updated on the group's activities. Before we start the session, I'd also like to reiterate some housekeeping rules. As you might be notified right now, the session is being recorded. And so we do request all of the participants for the duration of the session that they keep their mics on mute. The format of this session is going to be more leaning towards a Q&A. So we would really encourage everyone to use the chat box feature liberally to post their questions. This would be monitored throughout the session and all your queries would be answered. And so without further delay, I'd like to jump onto the speaker introductions. Vaishnavi and Angira, first, thank you so much for taking up the time to join us today. Vaishnavi is a pre-doctoral research associate at Yale Research Initiative on Innovation and Scale. She completed her MSc in Economics from London School of Economics. Her research interests lie in development, political economy, environment, and urban economics. Angira is a student at MS International and Development Economics program at the University of San Francisco. She is currently working as a project manager while conducting an experiment at Delhi School of Economics. She geeks out over behavioral and experimental economics with a special focus on climate change and technology adoption. So thank you both for sharing your experience and also agreeing to do this session. There were a lot of inquiries that were very specifically aimed at understanding how the master's process and enrolling in the same works out. So we're very, very excited to have this session. And so without much delay, I think over to you.
Angira, do you want to go first? Otherwise, I can start.
You can start.
Okay. Thank you so much for having both of us and me here. And yeah, so first, before I start addressing any of the questions that we've received, I thought it would be useful to just generally talk about my experience and how I landed up at the master's that I did and how I think that's helped me. And to then just also to highlight how all of this is, I don't know if there is a correct advice that you can get when applying for master's programs. All of this is stuff that I have learned through my experience, and it's entirely based on that. Other people might have very different things to say about it, and neither is more correct or more wrong. So yeah, just before I start, so my experience was that I decided I have an undergrad in economics that I completed in India at Ashoka University. And after that, I decided that I wanted to do research in economics, but I was 70% convinced that I want to do a PhD, not entirely convinced. And someone told me, no, that you shouldn't get into a PhD program unless you 100% know that you want to do this. I think I took that too much to heart. And then basically I was okay, I need to do a master's, and basically need to do a master's from a place where I can understand, I feel for me it was, I need to do a master's right after. So I started looking at programs and I applied to a bunch of places in India and abroad. And based off my offers, I was happiest with my offer from LSE. And so I decided to go for a master's there. Since then, I've worked at LSE for a year as part of their crime analysis unit, and then also worked for the last year at Yale doing a pre-doc here. and I'm hoping to apply to PhD soon. So all of this was with my entire master's process is very geared towards like me ultimately doing research, and that was something I knew before I started my master's. So I think that's something I wanted to highlight. In terms of what programs exist in masters in Europe versus masters in the US. So a whole bunch of programs exist, and I don't think I can list out all of them, even remotely like do justice to this list. So I would say look these up online extensively. There are a number of master's programs in Europe because a lot of the PhD pipelines in Europe, a master's program is very much needed. It's similar to the India process, wherein like you need an undergrad and then you need a master's to be able to get into the PhD. It can be some kind of a master's. It doesn't have to be a, a master's in like a specific subject. It can be a master's in research, but you basically need some sort of a bridge or an MPhil or something like that to get into a PhD program in Europe. So it usually helps to like have some kind of masters there, which is why they have a lot more options in terms of econ masters programs. And across programs like the ones that I looked at when I was applying, I was considering schools in the UK, in Spain, France, and Italy. And I didn't really like throw a wide net out, but there are lots of programs in the Netherlands and in Germany which are also great and definitely worth considering. How they differ from ones in the US, they are sometimes a little cheaper to do. Quality, because there are mildly more scholarships for like the Europe programs, but it really depends on the ones that you're applying. I don't think it's like a huge difference. They also like, personally for me, it was like there were more options, and I thought that it was a slightly more structured program where there were more options available in terms of the course content as well. So yeah, that's basically what it is. But honestly, it's quite arbitrary which one you choose, whether you choose to do it in Europe or whether you choose to do it in the US. I don't think choosing master's programs is particularly organized in any way. Yeah, I think it might be a good time to pass this on to Angira, and then like we can circle back and start addressing the questions or something.
That sounds like a really clear way of going about it. Yeah, it's kind of arbitrary where you want to apply to. I would definitely agree on Vaishnavi with almost everything that she said. The funding bit, what I would add for the US is that it largely depends on your department funding and your department funding for that particular year. So in the US, almost every university has an internal scholarship fund, and as well as college funds, as well as department funds. So I got scholarship from our college fund instead of like our department fund, because our department funds research research that we would want to do. So as far as making the choice of like going for a master's, I had no clear like where I wanted to go idea in my head. I graduated during COVID, so it was 2020. We had no idea when our exams would happen. We had no idea when we'd be getting our results. So I was just preparing for my master's in India, and I was also doing this data development in economic policy by MIT. And they had this one seminar where they had invited professors from USF, University of San Francisco, come talk about their program and like the fact that we could transfer our credits that we earn from this program to their program. And I went through their website. It said that they did not require GRE, and as you know, programs in the US require, almost all MS Econ programs require GRE. So that was something that interested me, and I looked through like the kind of research that our professors did at USF, and I really liked the program and how it was structured. And I knew for sure that I wanted to do field work, that I wanted to be involved in like development economics and wanted to work in development policy. So like she said, like it's not very structured. It can go wherever you want to take it. Like there's a whole bunch of opportunities wherever you want to end up at. Um, I mean, it's very arbitrary to the course that you want to do. So if you want to study behavioral econ, there are specific schools that you should apply to. There are general econ programs as well as there are programs in experimental econ. So it largely depends on the kind of specialization you want to have. And I'm still a bit like iffy on whether or not I want to do a PhD. So that was not something that I really considered while applying for my master's. And I only applied to a bunch of schools where they did not require a GRE. So that was the one thing that I decided that I'm either doing my master's in India or I'm not giving a GRE. I know eventually if I want to do a PhD, I'll have to give it again if I have to apply. So I don't want to give a GRE and like I don't want to make the commitment initially. So yeah, that's been like my journey, and I really wanted to learn more about like how to do research in general, and so my like my exposure here in USF has been like so research heavy. So you also have to consider that while you're looking at programs. So yeah. And then like I can answer some specific questions.
Something I wanted to add that I forgot to speak about earlier. I think while a lot of the questions that I saw were also around like what are the returns to a master's and just generally like why should you do a master's? And I think this is a completely valid question. And I feel like when I decided to do one, I didn't have sufficient information. So I think that's one important thing to think about. What are your options if you want to do a master's, or like what are your options in the sense that like if you don't want to do a master's, but like what is the end goal that you're actually aiming towards? So I think that it's important to know that you don't need a master's, in the sense that it's not like without a master's you are not going to be able to do whatever it is that you're planning on doing. If you need to like if you want to get into PhD programs, you don't need a master's either from India or from abroad. You really don't need these things, but there are things that like it's just I feel like your view of how to like get ahead, or like your view of how to like just kind of like bypass certain ways, and everyone takes a different path to things. But I don't think that there's one set path and like a master's necessarily features on every single path that you take. So something that I would really say is that you should think very carefully about what your outside options are to a master's. So one, you should think about why you want to do a master's, in the sense that do you want to do it because like for instance for both of us, are we interested in research? Is that why we want to do a master's? Do you want to do a master's to be able to get like a policy job at the World Bank, or like do you want to do a master's to get a consulting job? Like all of those are very valid reasons to do a master's, but again, all of those, there are other ways to get those things without doing a master's as well, and I think that's important to remember.
And to add to that a bit, so what I've realized after like a year in my master's is that undergrads won't necessarily give you the data skills that you need to get jobs in other industries. So unless you want to like build yourself from scratch, masters do help you build all those data and programming skills. And that's something that masters, even in India as well as abroad, will have a heavy focus on, because in kind of this day and age, you need some form of like programming experience, especially if you want to get into an econ-centric field. And we also had one more question about is it possible for undergrads to directly apply to PhDs? So sometimes what the universities here in the US do is that if you apply for a PhD and they think you're a decent enough candidate, but not good enough to be able to survive the PhD program, they'll recommend you to their master's program. So like that's definitely an option you can try to aim for. But So yeah, I mean, there are programs where if you apply for a PhD, they recommend you to the master's program. But basically, it's like you need to have a whole bunch of like research skills to be able to get through a PhD programs, and it's very competitive. Like econ PhDs are a whole other world of its own. They the, it's like unless you know the top right people, you know the exact kind of people you should know about the PhD, and uh, the people who are writing your recommendation letters know people and are widely known enough, which is not the case. I feel for a lot of like South Asian or the global South researchers. American universities are very like league based, and PhD applications just get rejected because they wouldn't even know your professors. Um, so that in that sense, master's program do help you get build that sort of network and to be able to put yourself out there. And let me tell you, network effects are so true. Like I did my undergrad from Roundless in Delhi University, and once I went to USF, I realized the kind of networks that are just not only not accessible to us back home, but these opportunities are so scarce that even if I was interested in research, unless I know the exact people who can like, or I was like goody with all of my professors, which is usually not the case in DU undergrads. Like professors don't really care much. I mean, the ones that they do, they're great. But like, if you're lucky enough to have them, that's great. But a lot of times, what happens is that there are very strong network effects of applying for PhDs and applying for masters. So masters kind of bridge that gap between PhDs and yeah, jobs. There are a bunch of like alternative jobs if you just have the data skills from your masters in econ. So I know a whole bunch of people who are just working in the nonprofit sector. There are a lot of skills that econ folks just get from being able to translate, econ research stuff to translatable policy, and like being able to translate data into actual like actionable things is one thing that your econ degree does really well. I think across all programs, that's the one thing that econ degree kind of gives you an advantage to. So yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of opportunities in the private sector, in the nonprofit sector, in consulting. Because of my program is based in San Francisco, a whole lot of our seniors just get into industries and work in Silicon Valley. So that's definitely an option if people want to like apply and are not sure once they end up graduating and they know that they don't want to get into like a PhD program. There are a whole bunch of like strong data skills that any econ program will give you that you'll be employable pretty much in any industry.
Yeah, I think that like also adding to the thing about the do you need a PhD to like do you need a master's to be able to move from between an undergrad to a PhD program in the US? I used to think you did, but turns out I was wrong. You don't actually need one. You can actually, there are lots of ways to like do this. There are long drawn ways, but I mean, I've now completed a 2-year master's with 3 years of a predoc. So it's not like this has been really short for me in any way. But so the idea is that like you have options to do predocs, and I think the predocs culture is like now growing, which is great for international students. Like you don't need to necessarily, I don't think it's as easy as it sounds when people say just do a predoc and like you'll get into a PhD program. It's not that simple, but there definitely are options to like doing a different thing instead of a master's, if like say for financial reasons or just because you don't want to do a master's. I think that's completely fair. A Predoc is a great other option if you're interested in PhD programs in the US specifically. Also, I think there are ways to like one, do Predocs in the US, but also do Predocs in India, and maybe use those to either get into Predocs in the US or apply directly. I think both options exist, and that we should be making better use of it than we do currently. There were a bunch of other questions which I don't know how much to type out in the chat, so I'm just going to respond here. Somebody asked how mathematically intensive the economics courses outside India are. Depends entirely on the courses that you choose, and I think that is a great way. That is a great method, at least from what I was told, to like pick good courses, because the better econ courses tend to like the better econ courses for research purposes tend to be more mathematically intensive, and you want that. So a course that has more math is actually giving you an introduction into graduate econ, and that's important for you to get. So it varies a lot by course, and I would say like look up the actual course structure. You want to make sure that they have some kind of core courses in micro, macro, and econometrics for you, not just like 2 of the 3 or like 1 of the 3. Ideally, you want all 3. And then I was told this. Now, I've heard very different advice on this, so I'm not entirely sure the correct way on this is. I was told that when you're picking master's programs, don't get swayed by the number of electives that they offer you, because that's secondary. The core courses are more important. So you want the math to be really strong, and you want it to be mathematically intensive. And in fact, that's like one of the big things that kind of sets you apart after a master's when you're applying directly, because it's like you've done some amount of like mathematically intensive econ, which is what graduate econ is. So I think that's an important one, but you should like pour through the course content and pour through the master's structure and content to like try and get it. What extracurriculars did I engage in that helped increase my chances of getting into LSE? I don't know what helped my chances to get into LSE, so I don't know if these helped. I didn't do any real extracurriculars during college for sure. I draw and paint a lot, so I was just doing that, but that's about it.
What I would recommend is focus on your grades. So that's something that pretty much is known, but your grades do matter a lot. So it's mostly like people will look at your statement of purpose, your grades, and your letter of application. Like these 3 things make it or break it. So if you have one thing that's like average, so if you have like average grades, then you need to have a fantastic letter of recommendation and a fantastic statement of purpose. And you should basically know why you want to apply for this program. So that's where researching on the different kinds of like things that the course structure is about, the kind of research that the currently like professors who are there, and the kind of professors you want to work with. If there's like a bunch of professors on environmental econ, and you can like justify with some of your experience that environmental econ is something that I definitely want to take, and you want to work with this particular professor, go for it. Like so these 3 things are what you should focus on, and definitely like GRE grades and your English language. Your English language grades are just to like get an understanding of your proficiency. They don't really make it for you, but your grades, be it your GRE grades or your undergrad grades, plus your statement of purpose, plus your recommendation letter. So there's a trade-off between all of the 3, and so you can like pick. And extracurriculars, they kind of help enhance your performance, but they don't really like, if you don't have enough good grades and you don't have that great of a letter of recommendation from the curriculum professor, then I don't think that makes a whole lot of difference. At least that's what I've been told so far.
Yeah, I think Angira kind of answered this, but a lot of questions in the chat are sort of all in the theme of what you need to apply. So I think it might be just useful to like give I don't know how much this differs for the US, so like just correct me or like add to this or change this, please. But for Europe programs, usually you need a GRE. It's not necessary. Schools like Paris School of Economics actually don't require you to need a GRE, but that's typically you need some kind of a GRE score. You might need an English test, but they usually let you apply without an English test and can give you a conditional offer based on that English test. Also, it's a great idea to write to schools asking them for a waiver. I did that. Some schools were nice, some schools weren't, because yeah, I got a letter from my university saying that like everything was in English. And so I was like, all my education is in English. So like, can I get a waiver? Some schools gave it, some schools didn't. You want to make sure you have transcripts to give them. And obviously, better the transcript, the better it is. I think these were the three major things that you need. You need a statement of purpose, which is something you draft on your own, stuff that makes it more effective, less effective. There are different views on this. But my take is that you should talk about what you want to do, why you're doing the master's, what you're interested in, why this particular master's is of interest to you, and don't lift stuff off websites like things like I'm interested in LSE because it's in London. I mean, that's not a good enough answer to convince LSE to like get you. They get like thousands of applicants, they're going to pick 100. So you want to make sure that like you want to show them that you've actually thought this through carefully. So like, I don't know, I want to like work with this professor, or like you have XYZ research center, which is interesting to me, or like, yes, stuff along that line. Basically, you want to show the school that you've actually thought carefully about why you're applying to them. Another thing to include is why you think you are a good fit for that school. So I think that's actually majority of my statement of purpose, where I talk about what like prior research experience I have, or like prior coursework experience I have, and what I've tried to learn from it, and why that makes me a good fit, or like why that makes me capable to handle the coursework that the master's is going to give me, because they're trying to assess that using this essay. These were the main elements. Now they might differ a little bit by different schools, and you have letters of recommendation, typically 2 to 3. Again, differs by school. Some schools might need just the one. Some schools can allow you to submit up to 4, but typically 2 to 3 is about what it is. And yeah, so these were largely the major elements, and then you can add or remove them by specific schools. And I encourage you to go look at the schools to like figure out what their requirements are. Typically, the application cycles start around like late September, October. For the UK, they start early, but they end much later. So because they're rolling, so like typically they keep admitting students or accepting applications until mid-January, but the earlier you apply, the better it is. For France, it's much later. You can apply March, I think, was when the applications for France went in. Germany, I'm not sure, but it's also a little later. So typically, like it'll be between November, December, and some of the later ones would be around February, March. It's important to keep those timelines in mind, especially if you need to take like exams like the TOEFL or like IELTS or GRE and stuff. And
Yeah,
if I did, sorry, go ahead. No, I was just saying that I didn't work after my undergrad before I applied for my master's. But I think if you have prior work experience, of course you should mention it. Anything that you've done is like is a great thing to add to your application. You just have to tell them you did this and like how you think that sets you apart from like everyone else. That being said, I think work experience helps. I had part-time RA experience, which I tried to spend a lot of time on my SOP mentioning. So I think it generally is a good idea to do that.
Yeah, even for undergrad research, like I did an impact evaluation study during my undergrad. Like any amount of research experience you've had, put it in. That's usually like if you're applying for a research oriented program, not like an applied research is always like a good thing to add. Yeah, I mean, you should know the various kinds of methods used in econ research. And we don't have to be well versed, but like have a bit of understanding of that. So definitely undergrad research helps. And adding to the application cycles in the US, it happens like there are a bunch of application cycles. So some programs are start in the fall, so they'll have their applications start in like say it's September, early October, and there'll be multiple application cycles. So like usually it's like October to December, January to March, and like March to April. So it's like a bunch of application cycles. So I would definitely recommend everyone to like apply as soon as possible, because it's also kind of rolling. So just apply as soon as possible. Sometimes even for GRE, like they give you a conditional offer. These like if you don't have a GRE, just ask them that I don't have a GRE yet, but can I apply? So like some programs like you do that and give the TOEFL and the GRE later. That's definitely like get your application in as soon as possible. As for like some programs don't require GRE altogether, so might as well apply. And some programs also have that your application fee itself could be very less if you apply the sooner. Like if you apply in the first application cycle, some programs don't even have application fee if you apply in the first cycle. That's what it was like for my for USF. So that definitely helps. What else? Program managers. So like talk to program managers and like ask them everything you want to know about the program. They're always here to help, and they kind of encourage you to talk to them. You can always ask for waivers, especially. So I was from the COVID batch, so I could request like waivers quite easily, and at the time all the universities were giving away waivers, but it never hurts to try. So I would definitely encourage everyone to just talk to their program manager, inquire about the course a bit, and they're usually nice people, and it will be like a nice thing to like get a bit of information, even if it's just like seminars that they have. A lot of programs have seminars, introductory seminars where professors come to talk about, oh, this is our program and this is how we do it. So ask your program manager as much as possible, not to the point of like frustrating them, but definitely like reach out, show your interest, and kind of be involved in the process. So yeah, another question that I received was how research focused is the course at USF. So at USF, the thing that attracted me to this program the most was there's a mandatory like field research requirement. So you kind of have to work with primary data that you yourself go out to collect, and it's all department funded. And basically, you come up with your thesis at the end, and it's heavily research focused. You have like all 4 semesters of like intensive math coursework, and so I've talked about this a bit, but the job prospects are extensive, especially if you get an econ degree. You have the data skills needed in the industry right now. So you could work in the industry, you could work with nonprofits, you could work with governments. Basically, everyone is vying for data skills at the moment, and the more you have in these days, the better it is. And we have like a bunch of students from our program go on to do PhD. So even that's like, if that's something you want to consider. So yeah, I would say it's pretty research focused. Everyone is doing some form of research or the other, and it's intensive research. It's not just a term paper kind of thing. It starts from your second semester and goes on to the end of your course. So like 1.5 years of extensive research. So you come up with a really like polished research paper, and a bunch of our alumni have like published these papers in like some really good journals. So if you just want to know about yourself, does having work experience in non-econ field put you at a disadvantage? Not exactly, because you would know the kind of like things that are required. I mean, that kind of depends. If it's like completely different in a certain way, you can always like polish or manipulate what the kind of work that you did. And I put this like lightly, don't like manipulate, but you can always find a resemblance of the kind of work that you need in an econ background if you've had a bunch of econ. So yeah.
There was someone, I'm sorry, I'm just going through the Google form responses now, because I don't see any questions in the chat that we've not answered. So, okay, can we elaborate more on funding? I think this is a common theme across. So, it's a great question. Sadly, we don't have access to too many good scholarships, but there are some that exist. I think one way to do this is to identify the scholarships that exist and make sure you know their deadlines. Like the Rhodes Scholarship is actually in August, so you want to be sure that like you've not missed any of these deadlines. So there's some that you need to apply to before you get in, but most you need to apply to after you actually have an offer or you put in your applications. Some of the big ones for the UK are the INLAC Scholarship, the Commonwealth, the Rhodes Scholarship if you're applying to Oxford. There is, sorry, which one?
Chevening.
Yeah, the Chevening. There is, I forget what the first bit of it is, but there's some Tata Scholarship. There is Aga Khan, but I did not apply for that one, and I'm not entirely sure how that process is different. There are a few. That being said, that's not a lot. Another way to go about this funding dilemma is to pick schools in places where the tuition is actually much lower. So if you look at places like Germany, Switzerland, and even France, a lot of the schools are very subsidized programs. So like you actually end up paying very little in tuition, which is a huge saving. So that's another way to go about it. And that's not a bad strategy at all. For France, you also have the Charpak Scholarship, which is a big one. So that's that's just good to like keep in mind so that like you can plan your deadlines ahead and you can, because a lot of these scholarships will require essays which are very specific to the scholarship. You can obviously tailor it using your statement of purpose, but you will need to write something up for the scholarship itself. So it's good to know that in advance. How can we properly communicate our needs for funding via emails? Sadly, nobody looks at emails for funding. So the best way to do it is to apply through the scholarships, or in case like there are schools which actually, okay, sadly, nobody in the UK that I was applying to was looking at emails for funding. But if there are schools that encourage you to do this, you should definitely be very explicit about it and mention to them how much you need the funding. And like, if you need to attach documents to like give proof, you should do that. What channels we can reach out to? I think definitely reach out to the scholarship people to like ask for questions if they respond. A good site to like be aware of is the Indian government. The foreign ministry usually has like a link on their website which talks about current scholarships. It's not exhaustive, but sometimes you can find scholarships which are like between countries. Like I remember they had one between India and Italy at that point when I was applying, which like only run for a few years. So that's a good resource to also make sure to check. But definitely reach out to students who you know of or can find on LinkedIn or on Twitter that are like there. And I think sometimes people who've applied there, especially if they're the same nationality as you, have actually explored these options, and it's good to like get a second opinion from them to make sure if you've like missed something or not. Angira, do you want to add to this?
Yeah, so for the US, funding is kind of tricky because, as I think everyone knows, how ridiculously expensive education here is. So I would definitely not recommend people. I mean, I would recommend people apply, but don't be too disheartened if you get through a really good program, but scholarship is scarce. And there are a bunch of like scholarships that you can apply to. The US offers some scholarships. There's a bunch of like scholarships by the Indian government. There's Fulbright and stuff. I didn't apply to many. So there are a bunch of restrictions when you apply for scholarships. What worked for me was like multiple different sources, and I managed to do another course that so in America you have to pay based on the credits that you take. So every semester you have to take a certain amount of credits, and based on that you'll have to pay. So what I did was I had credits through like other sources. I was doing that MicroMasters program by MIT. So I managed to get some of my fee reduced as it is. I also got some scholarship from my college, like College of Arts and Science at USF. And there's a bunch of like merit scholarships. And because you can work on campus, almost every international student kind of works on campus. And so what I would say is like funding your education. US is kind of tricky and it can be ridiculously expensive. So be open to looking for other like schools, even if you get into the top schools and they're not giving you scholarships, trust me, it's not worth it. Like you can get into other good programs that give you sufficient enough scholarship for you to survive. No amount of like getting a Harvard degree or a really good school's degree will be good enough if you don't have a job at the end, A, and B, if you're ridiculously in debt. So that's something that you should definitely look for. As for living expenses, I live in San Francisco, which is like ridiculously expensive, but I work on campus, I work as a TA, I work as a research assistant. So a lot of the universities also do this one thing where they'll basically give you a stipend if you're working as a research assistant or a teaching assistant. Especially the schools where they don't have a PhD program. So ours does not have a PhD program, so master students can work as TAs. And so that really like reduces your cost of tuition as well as living costs. And part-time jobs on campus are always available. So you can definitely like try to make your living expenses through that. But as for scholarships, like it largely depends on your department funding as well as your college funding in that specific year. So during COVID, what had happened was all of the university, pretty much everyone was like directing funds towards like COVID mitigation and a whole lot of these things. So yeah, that largely depends on your school and the funding of your department. That being said, every department would have some form of scholarships because they kind of want the right kind of students. So definitely, I would say reach out. They may or may not like respond to funding emails. So like try to make it more comprehensive when you reach out. So just mention that you're interested in this program and you want to chat and like set up a time, ask if it's possible to like meet over Zoom or something like that. Some programs reply nicely, some programs don't. It's there's a lot of information symmetry there, but you should reach out to as many people as possible, I would say. As far as the difference between an MS and an MA goes, in the US, it does make a difference. So an MS in the US will offer you a STEM visa, versus an MA, which will offer you just an F1 visa. So the difference is that with a STEM F1 visa, you can stay for 3 more years once you're done with your degree. So you can work on an OPT, whereas with an ME, you can't do that. So if that's something that you want to like have some time looking for a job after your master's, I would definitely recommend opting for a STEM program, which is like a master's in science, as compared to an ME. I'm not sure how it works in the UK, but it's kind of
I feel like Angira might be facing a power cut. So in the meantime, Vaishnavi, if you can just take up more questions from the chat box.
Yeah, sounds good. So I don't think there are questions on the chat that I haven't addressed, but I can jump on to the questions on the Google form. But looks like Angira's back. Angira, do you want to finish what you said? It cut off in the middle.
yeah. So yeah, my electricity went off. Basically, as far as funding goes, you can make your living expenses in the US. I think for campus jobs, there are a whole bunch of like different campus jobs that you can apply to. So you can make a living, like you can make enough money to like make your living expenses. It's the tuition that you should worry about. And there's also a bunch of like um, other opportunities where you can work as an RA or a TA, where you can get like basically subsidize your tuition, but that largely depends program to program. So I would definitely like ask you to reach out to these people, talk to them. So yeah. Should we answer the questions on the Google form?
Yeah, just quickly, I am working at Yale as a pre-doc. I am not a postdoc here. I'm sure having a master's helped, but I also I we don't know what the counterfactual is. I don't know if I didn't have a master's, would I have gotten in? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. How was that application process? I direct you to something called the Tobin Predoc Fellowship, which has a very detailed description of the application process on the website. Moving
and if you
to
want to
questions.
And there's an organization called Predoc.org that helps people like, prepare for a pre-doc. And because in the US, what people do is like go directly after undergrad to PhDs. I mean, I have not heard of many people like going directly after an undergrad from India to a PhD program. It's very uncommon. So unless you have like mad math skills, it's always advisable to have a master's. And so pre-doc is basically, it tries to give you an edge over having just a regular master's or just an undergrad degree. It kind of exposes you to the kind of life an academic would have, and it also like allows you to take some classes at the university. So pre-docs, I mean, it's as long as you have data skills, I feel like having a pre-doc or a master's degree for a pre-doc, that does not actually matter all that much. At this point, if you have some real analysis, if you have some like really mad data skills and a good enough motivation to want to do a PhD, you can get through even with it. But it is highly unlikely that you would have those kind of skills with an undergrad, especially so like I did my undergrad at Delhi University, and I kind of think that we don't have enough skills to apply for a PhD directly. I hope that answers that.
Yeah, I want to address one question which was on the Google form, which is I'm really passionate about climate change and I want to do my master's in it. Are there tips on how I should prepare my application to universities like LSE, specifically the environmental econ program? Um, On tips on how to prepare for environmental econ program applications, first check their website to like see if they have some kind of specific requirement for the environmental econ program. You want to highlight why environmental econ in your SOP. For LSE specifically, I don't know too much about this program because it's actually not under the econ department. It's a program that's run by the geography department. So it is less mathematically intensive than most other econ programs that LSE offers. So that's something to keep in mind. How important is the GRE score now post-pandemic? I don't know. They still say you should do it. I would be on the safe side and do it the best that I can. For a master's program, typically you don't need a GRE score, which is as high as you do for a PhD econ application. I applied with a 164 in my quantitative scores. I was fine. I know people who got into my program with a 161, also fine. But I would say take it as the best that you can. I don't think anyone knows how to like assess whether it's still important or not. Same for grades. I don't know how people are seeing it post-pandemic. I can't tell. How is UCL for economics? Great program, really good program, very good faculty. It's a 1-year econ program and I've only heard good things, so I guess it's good.
I have just one question that I would like to answer. It's like for a person who is going there for the first time, what are the things that we should look out for and what should we do? I'm guessing it's like how do we figure out what kind of programs that we want to apply for? And the first thing is that you should be able to assimilate yourself a bit in the culture. So like don't apply to universities that offer the programs in other languages if you don't know those languages. I think that's kind of the basic basic understanding. But so there are certain cultures that you may or may not be able to assimilate yourself. So like learn a bit about the city as well. So so if you go to, let's say, Seattle, it's raining all the time and that can kind of affect your mood a lot. So kind of consider that also while applying. I mean, it's not a huge factor, but trust me, when you don't get sunlight for 7 days straight, it gets really bad, especially if you're staying away from your family, you're alone. It kind of can take a toll on your mental health. So definitely like consider those things. As far as language barriers, so like language barriers do come in place in certain places. So like in France, you kind of have to know the language. I mean, people do speak in English, but the people who I've met so far and who've done their masters in or undergrad in Paris, they generally say that people are not nice if you don't know the language. Same goes for German. So definitely like those programs would be cheap, but have a bit of like understanding of their language and their culture. So yeah, there's only one way to combat the language barrier. It's just learn the language or like have a bit of understanding for the language.
I would add to this language thing. Please make sure you are applying to a course in a language that you understand. I have met people who applied to courses thinking they were in English, but they were in different countries and turns out they were not in English. And they reached there and that's when they found out, which is not what you want. Yeah, please make sure that you check what the language requirements for your course are and that you are able to actually attend the course well. I think my way around it was I only applied to places which were one, I knew the language, English, or if I didn't know the language, the course was being conducted in English and there was sufficient amount of international students that made me feel comfortable applying there. but I don't know if that's the best way to get about the language barrier. I think it's a very good question, and I think it's something that you should spend time thinking.
Yes.
Ayushi, I know we're close, or we're literally about, like, we're over time, but there are a few questions over on the Google form. Is it okay if we address those?
Yeah, if there are larger themes that they kind of all coincide with, we can take another 10 minutes to address those. I think that'd be
So just one big one that I wanted to address was someone, I think a few were trying to compare a master's in India to a master's abroad, and also this idea that if I already have a master's in India, should I apply for a master's abroad? I don't think there is a correct answer to this. I think that masters in India and masters abroad are similar, definitely, and it depends a lot on what you're interested in. I feel like I would think backwards from like what I want to be doing. If you're interested in working at a job abroad, it might be a good idea to get a master's abroad and try to get one in a place where you want to be working. At the same time, if you're thinking of if you have a master's already and you want to apply for another master's, you can. My personal view there is a predoc is much more helpful at that case. You also earn money, which is nice. So like there's a little bit of that, and I think that you can obviously apply if you already have a master's. One of my classmates was someone who already had a master's from India, and he reapplied. But that option does exist. Whether you should or not is a personal call entirely. I think the returns depend so much on what you want to do. As I've emphasized earlier, also, I think that you should strongly consider other options as well, even if you're having trouble with funding, and yeah, like Angira said, there's no point in like going to a great university if you're going to be ending up in a lot of debt that you don't think you can recover. So I think that it's important to like consider all the different pathways that you can get to get to whatever like ultimate goal that you have in mind. What is the expected salary when you come back was one of the questions. Don't know. Actually, I don't really know.
Depends
How
on your
easy or
industry.
difficult.
So it depends on the city you're in. It depends on the field that you end up working at. City and the kind of field that you're working in affect largely how much you'll earn at the end of the program, and the kind of work experience you've had so far. So even if two people who are like pretty much have the same background, but one has had a little bit of more work experience, would definitely like earn more at the end. So it kind of, especially in the US, it largely depends on what city you end up at. So yeah, I mean, an econ degree would definitely like get you to livable, like more than livable wages, I would say. I can say that only for the US, econ programs are extremely data heavy these days, and these are the skills that are required in the market. So definitely like it largely depends on the city to end up at. If you're ending up in Texas, you earn by Texas standards. If you're earning in California, you earn on the basis of Californian minimum wage. So it's more than enough to like let you to have a decent enough life, I would say. But again, largely depends on where you end up at. If you end up in academia, you're not going to be earning as much as, let's say, an industry person would. So that's definitely something to consider. So yeah, and Vaishnavi can add.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think what industry you're in makes a huge difference. Yeah, I agree with everything what you said. I do think that while I'm emphasizing that there are alternative paths to doing a master's, just sorry, I'm thinking because like one of the questions said that why is doing a master's abroad valuable? For me, it was valuable because I think that had I been I think at some point in my life, I decided I wanted to do a PhD. And in my head, I was like, I was reading papers by all these people who were at different universities like MIT and Yale and like a lot of these big names. And at that point in my life, I was like, okay, yeah, I want to be able to apply to these places if I ever decide to do a PhD. And it felt like the course at LSE was matching my interest, and like it just felt like the people working there were closer to like what I was reading and what I wanted. But I don't think that's necessarily the correct way. I think there are many ways to it. You can do a pre-doc, but it might just take you, like, for instance, it took me 2 years to do a master's. And then after my master's, I was able to get pre-docs directly outside India if I wanted. Maybe if I did a master's in India, that process would have taken me another year or two. But like, I think it's still possible. Just to keep timelines in mind. Like, I think that that's the only constraint there. I don't think uh, it's like one is far more valuable than the other or anything like that. I don't think there's a clear comparison. I think we addressed something. There's someone who asked the same question a bunch of times, which I forgot to address, which was suggest universities that offer MA in economics to people who didn't have maths in their plus two. Um, it doesn't matter. I think that your exposure to economics and math in your undergrad is what matters. 11th and 12th usually doesn't make too much of a difference. So as long as you can show that like you have gotten sufficient exposure to math and are comfortable with math since your class 12th, then I think you should be fine.
Yeah, and you don't necessarily need to opt for an MA if you didn't have enough math. It's just that your ability to cope up with that much math should be good enough. Because if you sign up for an econ program, you should know that it will be math heavy, regardless of it being an MA or an MS.
Another thing I want to add to the question that we've already answered is what should you look out for when you first go there? I think Angira got a great answer to that. Something I want to add about master's programs in general, for me, when I first went, they were highly overwhelming because undergrad econ is very different from master's econ. And it tends to, at least for me, it was overwhelming and tend to send me in like spins where I was convinced that I knew nothing. So I think it can definitely be overwhelming at first. It's exceptionally difficult, but it's okay if you enjoy it. And I think like going there expecting that is a good idea, which I wish someone would have told me, but I did not know. So that's something that I think you should look for, regardless of whether you're doing a master's in India or abroad. And what should you do about it? Just speak to people before you go to a program. If you have an offer, if you've decided to go, make sure you find someone on the internet who's gone to the same program recently and speak to them about it. I think that makes a huge difference as to what you understand and what you expect from the program. And it's also useful to like just verify that whatever you have in mind is a correct expectation of what to anticipate. Yeah.
So have you got into questions, Fran?
I think so.
Okay, great. I'm assuming there aren't any more questions from the audience as well. But yeah, thank you so much. And so we're okay to wind up the session. But thank you so much, Angira and Vaishnavi, for taking us the time and really getting into the nitty-gritties of the application processes and also sharing very candid opinions on, your take and views on how useful the same is. Thank you everyone for joining us today. And we do have similar sessions lined up generally, and also otherwise. We do organize a lot of senior speaker sessions. So keep an eye out on the group's activities and tune in for those as well. But yeah, thank you so much to the both of you. And it was really nice hearing from you.
Thank you for organizing.
Thanks. Thank you so
for
much.
inviting us. If anyone has any questions about PSF, they can feel free to contact me. So, thank you.
Same here.
Okay, so I'll be closing the session now. Thank you so much, everyone, and I hope you have a restful Sunday.